Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be diving into Agile Software Development,
Oh,
and we're going to be using Robert C. Martin's book on Agile Software Development as our guide for this.
sounds good.
And we're going to break down like how this whole Agile thing came to be, explore some of its core principles,
All right.
and maybe even uncover a few aha moments along the way.
Yeah, it's funny how agile is like such a buzzword these days,
Right.
but it really does represent like a pretty dramatic shift from how software used to be built.
Yeah, the book kind of paints a pretty not so rosy picture of the pre-Agile world.
Yeah.
Like lots of rigid plans, mountains of documentation, and yet projects still frequently went off the rails.
Yeah.
So what was it about the old way that like wasn't working?
So imagine this. You're building a house,
Okay.
but you're not allowed to change the blueprints once construction starts, even if you realize the bathroom is in the wrong spot.
Mm.
That's kind of what traditional software development was like. Too much emphasis on sticking to the plan, even when it became clear the plan wasn't quite right.
Yeah. That sounds kind of painful.
Yeah,
So Agile was basically a rebellion against that rigidity.
exactly. Back in 2001, a group of developers got together and said, there's got to be a better way.
Right.
They created something called the Agile Manifesto.
Okay.
And you actually have a copy of that in your sources.
Right.
It's not really like a rule book. It's more a declaration of values
Okay.
that prioritize flexibility, collaboration, and delivering working software
Right.
over rigid processes.
So it's less about like following a strict set of instructions
Right.
and more about adapting to like the ever-changing realities of building software.
Exactly.
Okay. But how do you actually like put that into practice?
Yeah.
It still seems kind of abstract.
Well, think of it like this. Instead of trying to plan every detail up front, you break the project down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay.
You work closely with the customer, get feedback early and often. Right.
And adjust course as needed. It's all about embracing change
Right.
rather than fearing it.
That makes sense. But doesn't that make it hard to like estimate timelines and budgets?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're constantly changing things.
It's a valid concern.
Right.
And that's kind of where some of the agile methodologies come into play. The book dives into one called extreme programming, or XP,
Okay.
which offers very specific practices to manage those challenges.
Okay.
For example, instead of writing like long technical requirements documents,
Right.
they use something called user stories.
User stories. What are those?
It's a simple idea, but it's really powerful.
Okay.
You capture the software requirements from the perspective of the user in plain language.
Okay.
So instead of saying, the system shall allow users to generate a report of all transactions,
Right.
you'd write a user story like, as a store manager, I want to see a daily sales report so I can track our performance. Okay, yeah, that's definitely easier to understand, but does that like really make a difference in how the software gets built?
Absolutely. By focusing on the user's needs and goals,
Right?
you ensure you're building something valuable. It also fosters better communication
Okay.
between developers and customers
Right.
because everyone understands what's being built and why.
So it's about getting everyone on the same page, speaking the same language, and building software that truly solves users' problems. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. What other tricks does extreme programming have up its sleeve?
Well, one of the core practices is working in short cycles,
Okay.
delivering working software frequently. Think of it as releasing small incremental updates rather than waiting months for a big grand reveal.
Okay.
This allows you to get feedback early and often, catching potential problems before they become major headaches.
So instead of one giant leap, it's more like a series of smaller steps, constantly checking in to make sure you're heading in the right direction.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could lead to more successful projects.
Exactly. And to manage those smaller steps, XP uses something called the planning game,
Okay.
where the team collaborates to estimate the effort required for each user story and plan the work accordingly.
So it's a team effort all the way, from
Right.
understanding the user's needs to planning and executing the work. No more lone wolf programmers coding in a dark corner.
Not in the Agile world. Collaboration is key. And to ensure quality code, XP emphasizes another practice, test-driven development.
Test-driven development. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Instead of writing code first and then testing it later, you actually write the tests before you write the code.
Okay.
This might sound counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it has some amazing benefits.
Like what?
Well, for one, it forces you to think through the functionality you're building
Right.
from the perspective of how it will be tested. This often leads to cleaner and more modular code.
So you're basically setting the rules of the game before you even start playing. I'm curious, how does that actually work in practice?
Luckily, the book gives us a front row seat to a real-world coding session where
Mm.
Robert C. Martin and another developer, RSK, tackle building a bowling game scoring system. They use test-driven development every step of the way,
Oh,
starting with a simple UML diagram to outline the structure.
that's awesome. So we get to see these agile principles in action,
Yeah.
not just in theory. What else can we learn from this bowling game example?
It highlights another important Agile practice, refactoring. Think of it like cleaning up your code as you go along.
Okay.
You might start with a simple solution,
Right.
but as you add more features and complexity, you need to refactor the code to keep it organized, readable, and maintainable.
So it's like tidying up your workspace while you're working so it doesn't become a chaotic mess.
Exactly. And refactoring isn't just about aesthetics. It's about making sure your code is flexible and adaptable so you can easily add new features or make changes in the future.
It sounds like refactoring is a crucial part of keeping the software healthy and agile, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Absolutely. And the book provides a great example with the generating primes code.
Okay.
Initially, it's a bit messy,
Right.
but through refactoring, it transforms into something much cleaner and easier to understand.
Okay.
It's like taking a tangled ball of yarn and carefully untangling it.
Okay, I'm sold on refactoring, but how do you know when to refactor? Is there like a set schedule or is it more of an ongoing process?
It's definitely more of an ongoing process.
Okay.
You refactor as you go,
Right.
whenever you see an opportunity to improve the design of your code. And remember, you're always working in short cycles, so
Right.
you have regular opportunities to step back, reassess, and clean things up.
Got it. It's about constantly striving for better, cleaner code. Now, I know Agile isn't just about specific practices like user stories or refactoring.
Right.
It's also got a set of design principles that guide the overall architecture of the software, right?
You're right. Think of these principles as guiding stars for creating flexible, maintainable software. They provide a framework for building systems that can stand the test of time and change.
All right, let's dive into those principles. Hit me with the first one.
The first principle is called the Single Responsibility Principle,
Okay.
or SRP, and it's actually pretty straightforward. Each part of your code should have one and only one reason to change.
Okay, I think I get that. But can you give me an example to make it clearer?
Sure. Imagine you have a piece of code that's responsible for both calculating the area of a rectangle and drawing that rectangle on the screen.
Okay.
That's violating the SRP because it has two reasons to change.
Right.
What if you need to change how the area is calculated, but you don't want to affect how the rectangle is drawn?
Ah, I see. It would be better to have two separate pieces of code, one for each responsibility.
Yes.
That way, you can modify one without affecting the other.
Precisely. And that's the essence of the SRP, keeping things focused and modular. This makes your code easier to understand, maintain, and change in the future.
So it's all about creating building blocks that are independent and well-defined, kind of like Lego bricks. That makes a lot of sense. What's the next principle we should explore?
Let's talk about the open-close principle, or OCP. This one is a bit more conceptual,
Okay.
but it's equally important. Essentially, it states that modules should be open for extension, but closed for modification.
Okay, I'm going to need a bit more explanation on that one. What does it mean to be open for extension but closed for modification?
Imagine you have a piece of code that represents a client connecting to a server.
Okay.
Now, let's say you need to change the type of server you're using.
Right.
The OCP says that you shouldn't have to modify the client code itself. Instead, you should be able to extend the system by adding new server types
Okay.
without breaking the existing client code.
So it's about designing your code in a way that allows for future changes and additions
Yes.
without having to rip everything apart and start from scratch.
Exactly. And a key tool for achieving this is using abstractions, like interfaces. Instead of the client depending directly on the specific server implementation,
Hmm.
it depends on an interface that defines the common behavior of all servers.
Okay.
Then you can create different server implementations that fulfill that interface
Right.
without affecting the client code.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's about building adaptable systems
Yeah.
that can evolve and grow without causing massive headaches every time something changes.
You got it. And that's a key theme in Agile design.
Yeah.
Embracing change and building software that can gracefully adapt to new requirements and challenges.
This is fascinating stuff. Are there any other principles we should know about?
Absolutely. There are a few more key principles that build upon these ideas of flexibility and adaptability. We'll dive into those right after. Just
Oh,
kidding. We're going to keep going.
okay, cool.
Okay. So we were talking about these design principles and how they make software, more flexible and adaptable.
Right.
And there's another one that's closely related to the open-close principle we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's called the Liskov substitution principle,
Hmm.
or LSP for short.
Okay, LSP. Another acronym to add to the collection. But seriously, like, what's this principle all about?
It basically says that, like, if you have a piece of code that works with a certain type of object,
Right.
it should also work with any subtypes of that object
Yeah.
seamlessly.
Okay.
Think of it like this. If you have a recipe that calls for a fruit,
Okay.
you should be able to use an apple, a banana, or an orange.
Right.
And the recipe should still work.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that apply to software? It's not like we're baking cakes with code.
Well, in software, we often deal with hierarchies of classes.
Right.
For example, you might have a base class called shape,
Okay.
and then subclasses like circle, square, and triangle.
Right.
The LSP says that if you have a function that operates on a shape,
Right.
it should work correctly, even if you pass it a circle or a square as input.
So it's about making sure that those subtypes don't break the functionality that was designed for that base type. It's kind of like making sure that if you use a banana in your fruit salad, it doesn't suddenly make it taste like chicken or something.
Exactly. And to make sure those substitutions work smoothly, the book introduces this concept of design by contract.
Design by contract. Okay, now we're getting into like serious sounding stuff. What's the contract all about?
It's not as intimidating as it sounds.
Okay.
Think of it as a set of clear agreements between different parts of your code.
Yeah.
Each piece of code has certain preconditions that must be met before it can be used.
Right.
And it guarantees certain postconditions after it's executed.
Okay.
It's like a handshake agreement. You give me this, and I'll give you that.
Okay, so it's about setting expectations and ensuring that everyone plays by the rules.
Right.
I can see how that would be important in a complex software system.
Yeah.
Are there any more of these principles we need to cover?
Yes, two more. The next one's called the Dependency Inversion Principle, or DIP. This one emphasizes that high-level modules, the parts of your code that deal with the overall logic of the application,
Okay.
shouldn't depend directly on low-level modules,
Mm.
the ones that handle the nitty-gritty details.
Right.
Instead, both should depend on abstractions.
Whoa. Okay, that's a bit of a brain twister. Can you break that down for me with a real-world example?
Sure. Imagine you have a simple program with a button and a lamp.
Okay.
When you press the button, the lamp turns on.
Great.
Now, in like a naive implementation, the button code might directly call the lamp code to switch it on.
Right.
But that creates a tight coupling between the button and the lamp.
What's wrong with that?
Well, what if you want to add a different type of lamp later? Or
Okay.
maybe even control a fan instead of a lamp.
Right.
You'd have to modify the button code every time you change the device it controls.
Right.
That violates the open-close principle we talked about earlier.
I see. So the DIP would say, don't let the button directly control the lamp. Create an abstraction that defines the general concept of turning something on. Yes.
And let both the button and the device depend on that abstraction.
You're getting it. That abstraction could be an interface called, say, switchable.
Okay.
The button would know how to interact with the switchable object, but it wouldn't care if it's a lamp, a fan, or something else entirely.
That's so clever. It's like having a universal remote control
Yeah.
that can work with any device as long as it supports the switchable interface.
Exactly. And that brings us to the last principle, the interface segregation principle, or ISP.
Okay.
This one is all about keeping your interfaces focused
Right.
and specific to the needs of the clients that use them.
Clients, like the users of the software.
Not in this context.
Yeah.
Here, clients refer to other parts of the code that use a particular interface.
Okay.
The ISP says that clients shouldn't be forced to depend on methods they don't actually use.
Okay, give me an example to illustrate that.
Imagine you have an interface called timer,
Okay.
with methods for starting, stopping, and resetting the timer.
Now, you also have a door class that needs to use a timer to control how long it stays open.
Okay.
So the door would be a client of the timer interface.
Right.
Yes. But the door only needs the start and stop methods of the timer. It
Right.
doesn't need the reset method.
So the ISP would say, like, don't force the door to implement a method it doesn't need.
Precisely. Instead, you might create a separate interface, maybe called simple timer,
Okay.
with just this start and stop methods,
Right.
and let the door depend on that.
It's like ordering a pizza with only the toppings you actually want. You don't need to pay for extra ingredients you won't eat.
I like that analogy. And that's the essence of the ISP. keeping interfaces lean and focused, which ultimately leads to more modular and maintainable code.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with these design principles.
You have.
It's amazing to see how they all kind of work together to create software that's flexible, adaptable, and resilient to change.
Yeah,
But let's be honest, even with the best principles in the world, things can still go wrong.
you're absolutely right.
Right.
That's where the concept of design smells comes in.
Okay.
Think of them as warning signs that indicate potential problems in your code's design.
Okay.
They don't necessarily mean something is broken, but they suggest that something might be amiss
Right.
and could lead to bigger issues down the road.
So they're like red flags that tell you to take a closer look
Yeah.
and see if something needs to be fixed. What are some of the common design smells we should be aware of?
The book lists quite a few, but some of the key ones include rigidity, fragility, immobility, viscosity,
Okay.
needless complexity, needless repetition, and opacity.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. Can you give me like a quick rundown of what each of those means?
Sure, rigidity means the system is resistant to change.
Okay.
Even small modifications require a lot of effort.
Right.
Fragility means changes in one part of the system can unexpectedly break other unrelated parts.
Got it.
Immobility means it's difficult to reuse parts of the code in other projects.
So those smells all point to a lack of modularity and flexibility in the code.
Right.
What about the others?
Viscosity refers to a situation where it's easier to hack a quick solution
Okay.
than to do things the right way,
Right.
often because the design itself is cumbersome.
Okay.
Needless complexity means the code contains elements that aren't actually necessary,
Right.
adding unnecessary bloat.
Okay.
Needless repetition means you have the same code duplicated in multiple places,
Right.
which makes maintenance a nightmare.
Yeah.
And opacity means the code is difficult to understand,
Okay.
lacking clarity and expressiveness.
Wow. That's quite a rogues gallery of design smells. It sounds like they can really make a developer's life miserable.
They definitely can.
Yeah.
And they can also lead to increased development costs,
Right.
longer timelines, and more
Mhm.
bugs.
Right. Yeah.
That's why it's important to be aware of these smells and address them early on.
So it's like preventative maintenance
Yes.
for your code. If you spot these smells, it's a sign that you need to do some cleaning up and refactoring.
Exactly. And remember, Agile is all about continuous improvement.
Right.
By being aware of these design smells,
Yeah.
you can constantly strive to create cleaner,
Right.
more maintainable,
Right.
and more adaptable software.
This is great stuff. But I'm curious, how does all of this theory actually play out in a real-world project? Does the book give us any examples of Agile, like, in action?
It does. The book dives deep into a case study of a payroll system.
Okay.
It's a complex system with lots of moving parts,
Right.
and it's a great example of how Agile principles and practices can be applied in a real-world scenario.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this payroll system case study.
It starts with like a detailed breakdown of the requirements.
Oh, okay.
The team uses user stories to capture the needs of the users, just like we talked about earlier.
Right.
They then use UML diagrams to visualize the structure of the system
Okay.
and how the different components will interact.
So they're essentially creating a blueprint for the software. Yeah.
But in a more flexible and iterative way than in traditional development.
Precisely. And throughout the design and implementation process,
Right.
they constantly refer back to the Agile principles we've discussed.
Right.
They strive for modularity,
Right.
flexibility, and
Right.
maintainability.
Right.
They work in short cycles,
Right.
get feedback frequently,
Right.
and refactor the code regularly.
So it sounds like they're really embracing that Agile mindset.
Yeah.
What else can we learn from this case study?
It highlights the importance of communication and collaboration
Right.
within the team.
Mm-hmm.
The developers work closely together,
Right.
pair programming,
Right.
reviewing each other's code,
Right.
and constantly sharing knowledge.
So it's not just about following a set of rules or using specific tools.
Yeah.
It's about creating a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement.
Absolutely. And that culture is essential for Agile to truly succeed.
This is fascinating. I feel like I'm starting to get a real sense of what Agile is all about.
Yeah. Not just the technical details, but also the underlying philosophy and mindset.
That's great to hear. And the book goes even deeper into that philosophical side of Agile,
Okay.
exploring the values and principles that make it so effective.
Okay, I'm ready to go deeper. What are some of those key values and principles?
Well, one of the core values is a focus on individuals and interactions
Okay.
over processes and tools.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that people are the heart of software development
Right.
and that collaboration, communication, and teamwork are crucial to success.
That makes a lot of sense. You can have the best tools and processes in the world, but if the team isn't functioning well, the project is doomed.
Exactly. Another key value is valuing working software over comprehensive documentation.
Okay.
It's not that documentation isn't important,
Right.
but the primary focus should be on delivering software that actually works and provides value to the customer.
So it's about prioritizing like tangible results over paperwork.
You got it. And this ties into another key principle: customer collaboration over contract negotiation.
Okay.
It's about working closely with the customer throughout the development process,
Right.
getting feedback regularly,
Right.
and ensuring that the software meets their needs.
So instead of treating the customer like an outsider, you bring them into the fold
Yes.
and treat them as a partner in the development process.
Exactly. And finally, there's the principle of responding to change over following a plan.
Okay.
Agile recognizes that change is inevitable in software development,
Right.
and that the ability to adapt is crucial to success.
That's so true. Trying to stick rigidly to a plan in a dynamic environment like software development is a recipe for disaster.
Right. So instead of trying to predict and control every detail up front,
Right.
Agile embraces change,
Right.
adapts to new information,
Right.
and constantly iterates to improve the software.
This is all making a lot of sense. I'm really starting to see the beauty and power of Agile, but I have to admit, my brain is starting to get a little full.
Yeah,
We've covered a lot of ground today.
we have, but there's still more to explore.
Okay.
The book delves into the fascinating world of design patterns,
Okay.
which are reusable solutions to common software design problems.
Okay.
Think of them as pre-built blueprints that have been proven to work in specific situations.
Design patterns. That
Yeah.
sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Well, imagine you're building a house, and you need a way to connect the rooms.
Okay.
You could reinvent the wheel and design a completely unique door for each room.
Right.
But it's much more efficient to use a standard door design that's been proven to work.
Okay, so I see the analogy. So design patterns are like standardized solutions to
Yeah.
common software design challenges.
Exactly. And the book covers a whole bunch of these patterns.
Okay.
From command and active object to template method and strategy to facade and mediator.
Wow. Okay.
It's like a treasure trove of wisdom from experienced software developers.
Wow, that's a lot of patterns. I'm guessing each one addresses a specific type of problem.
You're right.
Okay.
For example, the command pattern is a way to encapsulate a request as an object,
Okay.
allowing you to parameterize clients with different requests,
Right.
queue or log requests,
Right.
and even support undoable operations.
Right.
Active object is a way to decouple method execution from method invocation, allowing for asynchronous operations and improved concurrency.
Okay.
And template method is a way to define the skeleton of an algorithm in an operation,
Okay.
deferring some steps to subclasses.
Right.
This allows subclasses to redefine certain steps of an algorithm without changing the algorithm structure.
Okay. My brain is definitely getting a bit overloaded here, but I'm starting to see how these patterns can be incredibly useful for solving complex problems and creating more elegant and adaptable software.
They definitely can. And the book doesn't just describe the patterns.
Right.
It also provides practical examples of how to apply them effectively. It's like having a mentor guiding you through the intricacies of software design.
Speaking of mentors, the book also emphasizes the importance of teamwork and collaboration in agile development, right?
Absolutely. Agile teams are built on a foundation of shared responsibility,
Right.
open communication,
Right.
and a commitment to delivering value to the customer.
Right.
It's not about individual heroics. It's about working together to achieve a common goal.
And this collaborative spirit extends beyond the development team, doesn't it? Agile encourages close interaction with the customer
Yes.
throughout the development process.
Right. The customer isn't just a passive recipient of the software.
Right.
They're actively involved in providing feedback,
Right.
shaping the requirements,
Right.
and ensuring that the final product meets their needs.
It sounds like Agile really flips the script on traditional software development.
It does.
Instead of a linear waterfall approach where everything is planned up front,
Right.
it's a much more iterative and collaborative process.
Exactly. And that iterative nature is reflected in how Agile teams approach testing. They don't just test at the end of the development cycle.
Right.
They test continuously throughout the process.
So testing becomes an integral part of the development workflow,
Yes.
not just a final checkpoint.
Exactly. And this continuous testing helps catch bugs early,
Right.
ensures that the software is meeting the requirements,
Right.
and provides valuable feedback for improving the design.
This is all incredibly insightful. But before we go any further, let's pause and take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Right.
It's important to take a step back and let all this new knowledge sink in.
So for our listener who's new to Agile, what would you say are the key takeaways from our deep dive so far?
I'd say there are three key takeaways.
Okay.
First, Agile's about valuing people,
Okay.
working software,
Okay.
customer collaboration,
Okay.
and responding to change.
Right.
It's a mindset shift that prioritizes flexibility,
Right.
adaptability,
Right.
and continuous improvement.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second takeaway?
Second, Agile is not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay.
It offers a collection of powerful methodologies,
Okay.
like extreme programming,
Right.
Scrum feature-driven
Right,
development,
yeah.
adaptive software development,
Okay.
and more.
Right.
You can choose the methodology that best suits your project and team.
So it's like a toolbox with different tools for different jobs.
Exactly. And finally, Agile is a journey of continuous learning and growth.
Okay.
It's not about mastering every single technique or principle overnight,
Right.
but rather about embracing the values of collaboration,
Right.
feedback,
Right.
and iteration to constantly improve the way you build software.
This has been an incredible deep dive packed with insights and aha moments.
It has.
I feel like I've gone from Agile newbie to, well, maybe not an expert,
Uh-huh.
but definitely more informed and excited about this whole approach.
And that's exactly what we aim for with these deep dives. It's about giving you a shortcut to understanding complex topics
Right.
and sparking your own curiosity to explore further.
Now, before we wrap up, let's leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
If you're starting a new software project, which Agile principle or practice from this deep dive feels most relevant or intriguing to you, and why?
That is a good question to think about.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of like mulling over all the different principles and practices we've been talking about.
Right.
I think for me, the idea of user stories really clicked.
Yeah.
It seems like such a simple but powerful way to shift the focus to the user's needs
Yeah.
and like make sure everyone's building the right thing.
Yeah, it is powerful. And it ties in nicely with that whole Agile mindset of collaboration and communication.
Right. But the design principles are really fascinating too.
Yeah.
Especially that single responsibility principle, that
Yeah.
each part of your code should have one and only one reason to change.
Right.
It just seems like such a simple rule,
Yeah.
but it has such profound implications.
Yeah.
It does.
For how you design and structure software.
Yeah, and when you combine that with practices like refactoring, you really start to see how Agile can lead to code that's not only functional,
Right.
but also elegant, maintainable, and adaptable.
It's like you're building a system that's designed to like evolve and grow
Yes.
rather than one that's rigid and brittle.
Exactly. And speaking of evolving and growing, one thing we haven't really touched on yet
Right.
is how Agile teams actually manage their work.
Okay.
The book goes into some detail about different Agile methodologies like Scrum and Kanban.
Oh, yeah. I've heard those terms thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
What are the key differences between them?
Well, Scrum is a very structured framework
Okay.
with very specific roles, events, and artifacts.
Okay.
It emphasizes these short, iterative cycles called sprints,
Okay.
and it has a strong focus on daily communication and progress tracking.
So it's like a well-oiled machine with a clear set of rules and procedures.
Exactly. Kanban, on the other hand, is a more flexible and visual approach.
Okay.
It uses a board to visualize the workflow,
Okay.
and it emphasizes limiting work in progress
Okay.
to improve efficiency and reduce bottlenecks.
So it's less about strict rules and more about like visualizing the work and optimizing the flow.
Right. And the beauty of Agile
Mhm.
is that you can choose the methodology that best fits your team
Right.
and your project,
Uh,
or even like blend different methodologies to create a hybrid approach.
so it's like you have this buffet of options
Yeah.
and you can pick and choose what works best for you.
Exactly. And ultimately, the most important thing is to embrace those Agile values of collaboration,
Right.
feedback,
Right.
and continuous improvement.
Right.
No matter which methodology you choose, those values will guide you toward success.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered just about everything from our deep dive into Agile software
I
development.
think so.
From the origins of the Agile Manifesto to the nitty-gritty of like design principles and methodologies,
Yeah.
we've really explored these key ideas and practices that make Agile so effective.
Yeah, we even got to witness Agile in action with those real-world coding examples and case studies.
Right. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on software development.
Good.
It's not just about writing code.
Yeah,
It's about creating a culture of collaboration, adaptability, and continuous learning.
well said. And remember, this is just the beginning of your Agile journey.
Right.
There's a whole world of resources out there to help you deepen your understanding and hone your skills.
Exactly. So, to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep embracing the Agile mindset.
Yes.
Who knows? You might even discover your own unique way to apply these principles and practices to your work and your life.
And maybe even inspire others to join you on an Agile journey.
That's a great thought. Well, folks, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
Until next time, stay curious, stay agile.
And keep diving deep.